Well, welcome everybody to panel number 2. And we were just discussing, it was like, wow, are we supposed to like repeat what we just done? So it's a little bit, we don't know how we're going to go about this. But I will start off as, I'll start off my opener. So picture this. 8 to 10 people of an executive leadership team, you know, in their late 40s and 50s, sitting together, having a meeting about, you know, how do we hire these millennials and what do they want out of the career? And, you know, how do we retain them because we're going to spend a lot of money on them? And, but the difference, that sounds really familiar, but the difference in this story is that 3 brave souls stood up and said, yeah, we'll make it work in 15 minutes time. And we ended up creating a group of, we call it Millennial group, I think, or Millennial Plus, because some of them weren't Millennial. And we actually went on to win an award for diversity best practice. So I think that goes to show that sometimes you don't have to have the perfect solution, but the key is about actioning it and experiencing it and figuring out as we go. So we hope that today you'll walk away from this panel of really understanding from the perspective of the millennials that we have here, as well as sexy industries like Facebook that attracts millennials, but more importantly is advisors like Greg who helps any organization help define what it is.
I'm not fussy.
So with that, I want to just first direct my question to Greg. Greg is Gregor or Greg, or you could call him anything. It's definitely the most entertaining panelist. I'm sure you saw a lot of tweets from all the great quotes. So Greg, you know, we start off with an understanding, like, why do organizations actually engage in your services? Is that a good sign?
Well, it's good or bad, depending on what happens. I suppose it's definitely changed over the last 5 years. Being involved in leadership development and talent management programs and helping organizations craft their mandate and shape their culture that attracts and develops and motivates and retains talent for their organization. What's happening lately is specifically in terms of engagement. Rightly or wrongly, organizations seem to be fascinated with the term engagement and trying to create sustainable engagement in their organization. Instead of us getting to the point where we are providing the structure and the knowledge, we're shaping the culture, we're shaping behavior, we're shaping the leadership behaviors, we're working with the high potential teams, we're releasing talent and potential across the organization. Now it seems to be also about running hackathons, creating and reiterating ideas, being agile, creating structures, enabling organizations to wrestle with how they give millennials an opportunity to feel a sense of ownership in the business. Interestingly, Hire, who just bought the GE home appliances division, split the whole organization into 2,000 different organizations in order to give millennials one cross-functioning and cross-organizational working experience, so they're contracting them differently, but also to give them a sense of ownership and connection to the organization and the business, which has created what they believe is an incredible platform for sustainable engagement and delivery in the future. Every single organization is different. The structures are different. Legacy organizations are different. What Lale was saying earlier about the startups out in the lifeboats actually crafting already what is, because they don't have any legacy to burden them. I think traditional organizations and organizations have been around a long time. They have a bit of a fight on their hands because not only did they have to keep the ship running, as is, but they also have to try and adapt and change to meet the needs of the future and what the future of work look like. So in answer to your question, it's definitely changed, and it's much more exciting now. And they're holding us as suppliers and advisors and deliveries, and we're an external team to an organization for a number of years in terms of delivery and intervention. It holds us much more accountable to what actually happens in organizations than just going in, running an intervention and leaving. Yeah, so it's much more exciting.
So with that engagement point, so the millennial group that I started, Brenda here is a product of that success story, and it's that share with us what your learnings are from this group, and what was it like? What's your take on it, and then also kind of share with me now that you're went with a more of a social impact startup like company with Threat International, what brought you there?
Absolutely. So let's see if I get all of them answered in the correct order. So the takeaway that I took from the group was more. Elaine and I were at a big traditional corporation, and Elaine just kind of had this what seemed like a crazy idea of like, let's get all of the already motivated millennial and millennial mindset people and just put them in a room together and give them some interesting projects and kind of like ask them some hard questions and see what they come up with. And so what I learned from that is working in a big corporation, who the other cool people were and the people I wanted to talk to at lunch, where they were in the corporation. And to say that more seriously, it was more of, oh, these are other people that are like-minded that, hey, person in another division that I would never have met. I'm having this problem, this very real problem with my work and in my day-to-day job. Do you run into the same things because you do a parallel kind of role or you're in a completely different kind of role, but what's your take on it? So that was the biggest takeaway from that kind of core the core group was it wasn't so much the work we did in there that was so that changed necessarily the course of the company. It was more of it allowed us to connect with other people, whereas otherwise within the company we wouldn't have done that. After I was at the company for a fair number of years, and then I came across this company that takes water bottles from developing nations and turns them into fabrics and sells them to big brands. And we take water bottles out of developing nations as a way of providing a framework of jobs so that people can pull themselves out of poverty. And so we operate in countries like Haiti, Honduras, Cambodia, Bangladesh, where people don't necessarily have the support and the framework of their government or of society necessarily, so marginalized communities. And going from a corporate, very traditional role to a more startup role is something that my parents will never understand, and they still don't understand how I chose and how that was a wise decision. But for me, it was important because it allowed me to take my passion projects of charities and giving back to the community and meld it with my career path of supply chain and very much real. It's not just an NGO, it's something that's self-sustaining and that we're graded on to our shareholders, not just on our financial returns, but also on our environmental and social impacts. So it's a very big change, but something I would happily do again.
So then moving on to Cassie, who was my protege at the Women's Foundation Mentorship Program. And as I always say, I hope she learned as much from me as I did from her. And, she is probably the most hardworking, has the greatest tenacity. She's constantly pivoting. I call it learning and changing. And, she is in this this amazing journey of multiple startups and, multiple projects at the same time. She defies what I read in any research about millennials being lazy and da-da-da-da-da. And she's not bright-eyed, starry-eyed. She has a mission and a purpose. And so Cassie, tell us, do you think from your 3+ years in a entrepreneurial environment, what skills have you learned, and do you think you could have gotten these skill sets in a corporate world?
Thank you, Elaine. That's very kind of you. You've been a great mentor, and she keeps me on my toes. We disagree on a lot of things. I think she is a little bit more traditional than I am, but she, grounds me. So started my first startup about 3.5 years ago. And for the past 3.5 years, I probably learned more in the past 3.5 years than I have from my high school, college, MBA, plus 6 years in corporate world, all aggregate together. And I have to say that startup is not for everyone. What I've become is a professional firefighter. I wouldn't say that I wouldn't learn these skills in a corporate world, but what I had to do is learn everything very quickly. The skills that I've learned is basically learning very quickly and deal with everything all at the same time, from like fundraising to design thinking, learning what is agile project management, and hiring and motivating people who are about the same age. So having said that, you know, it is a great, great, great learning experience for me. Yes.
So George is from Facebook, and all the millennials fly over there because that's the sexy industry. So you probably have no problem about recruiting. But from what you've said, kind of like from what you hear from Cassie and Brenda, you know, does that resonate within the demographics within Facebook? And then within Facebook itself, you know, there's Silicon Valley Facebook. So is Hong Kong, Asia Facebook any different?
Thanks, Elaine. The Hong Kong office of Facebook is pretty diverse in terms of gender, age, you can look at me as sort of the benchmark. I think I'm sort of the average in terms of age. We have much younger colleagues, you know, in the late 20s probably. You know, the engineers are pretty young and very smart, but we also have the sort of more senior generation, and we get along very well. And I think the truth is, you said we don't have problem in recruiting, but in fact we do. We probably have a more stricter recruiting process, than average. It took a long time, longer time than usual perhaps to hire people. Partly because we want to hire the right people, and it's not just because of your CV, but more because whether we want, we want to see whether you believe in our mission, which is to connect to the world, make the world more open and connected, and bring the world more closer. So a lot of candidates may come. I'm also on the interview panel, so sometimes they come to us and then say, we ask, why you want to join Facebook, and say, oh, we heard that you have great benefits. Yeah, which is true, but we'd also love to hear more deeper thoughts on, but back to your point about the culture, at the headquarters in Hong Kong office, I think we do share a lot of things in common. At the Silicon Valley, where our company is headquartered, we talk about those core values such as be bold. You need to think outside the box to find the different solutions because the world is moving so fast, and you also need to be open. We can talk about basically everything, among our colleagues. If you have any chance to visit our office, any of the Facebook office in the world, you will, once you enter the office, you will immediately realize there's no box room for bosses. Like everybody is equal. You have a desk, no matter you are VP or you are manager or you are even an intern. If you go to headquarters, you will see Mark even doesn't have an office. He has a desk. So if any of the colleagues want to drop by to say hi, you can do that. But he travels a lot. So that gives people a strong sense of belonging and equality. And I think this is really a good reflection of some of the core values that the millennials believe in.
So in the last panel, we kind of talked about it's not just about the ice cream, which apparently Facebook you can vote on, is Movenpick. But more importantly, it's not just about those benefits, the freebies that we get. It's all about that environment. So we spent a little bit of time earlier discussing about working from home or flexible working places. And so I think, Greg, you mentioned you read the article that working from home is.
Oh, this is how to remind us what we said earlier, because I've forgotten it already. There was two interesting articles I read in the newspaper this morning on the ferry on the way in, and the first one was I can now have breakfast at Tiffany's. In New York, which I'm very excited by, and on my next trip, it's definitely on my agenda, so I can tick that box. And the second one was a piece of research that said we are 13% more productive when we work from home. And I went, finally, some data. I think half the challenge we have in organization of convincing the skeptics. And of course, in every organization, there are antagonists, protagonists, and terrorists, and we need all three to inform robust decision making. But to actually now begin to have robust data also, which backs up the argument about flexible working, that we don't just go home and work from home, which involves the TV remote control, a bowl of crisps, and my pajamas. In actual fact, I'm actually working and being more productive. And I think that the whole scariness, certainly from my parents' generation, and in some cases mine, Gen X, or freshly faced managers who turn around and walk into the office one morning and find all of their team not there, and just a series of emails saying I'm working from home. It says, how do we do this? And the question that is asked me in terms of how we shape the narrative in organizations as consultants is, how do we start to engender trust? Yeah, in a world that is so highly skeptical, yeah, and a place of work that's so highly skeptical, if the future or potential futures of work are to be considered to be possible, it's going to require us, yeah, to actually put our faith and trust where we should put it, which is in the people that's working for us. And when George talked about the mission and the vision and the passion, it's not only a sense of entrepreneurship and agile, fast-moving, and a questioning the ridiculous and questioning the why we're still doing it this way, it's not relevant anymore, that millennials bring to the party. It's also a connection. To access their passion, they have to believe in the vision. And when do we begin to trust that and make the right recruitment decisions to allow things like flexible working and technology to have its absolute benefit, and in terms of productivity as well? Yeah.
And I would also add to it on a very practical sense that allowing your team and kind of trusting your team, there's also a part where you have to push yourself as the manager, where you have to have very clear deliverables from your team, what you want them to accomplish by X deadline. That kind of washes out when you're working and you say, oh, well, Cassie works really hard every day because I see her at her desk all the time, right? When you do start to get these more flexible hours or kind of remote teams, all of a sudden that goes away, and that actually pushes you to be, you can see it as an opportunity to push yourself to be a better manager, because it comes back to what are the goals, what do we want to accomplish, and how am I communicating that with my team? So to tack on to your very high level, like a practical sense of it, like think of it as that, not as just like, oh, well, my team's not here, I guess I can leave, to more of like, well, how am I going to engage with my team, and how am I going to use technology to do that?
So one of my challenges in managing my startup is that hiring good people, but with limited budget, and and also with and it's also motivating them to do something you believe in. So you kind of have to align the vision and what is the cause. And so going back to the trust, my team, I have my engineering team in Beijing whom I have never met. And I don't, we obviously talk a lot and video call just on issues, but it's about delivering, and it's about, we want to do this. So I don't ask them how many hours of code have you done, or like, it's about, hey, there's a problem there. Please solve it. What are the deliverables? Setting expectation. So yes.
I just want to add on Chris' point. We do have an internal policy about work from home. So it basically gets the team leaders to decide how you want to implement it. It's pretty flexible. So any colleague basically can apply for 1 day out of a week, to work from home. I mean, it's your choice. I mean, if you want to work in office for the whole week, that you can do it. And yeah, so I was just thinking about a small story I can share exclusively with this session. I forgot to say in my last session. So my colleague Jen Liang, some of you may know her as the head of Great China office, and she's also one of the 2 VPs at Facebook in APAC in the entire company. We don't have too many VPs, by the way. When she started, she's number one. She's like a 001 employee hired by Mark and Cheryl to start up the whole thing in Hong Kong. The Hong Kong office was the first APAC office for Facebook. Many of you may not realize. When she started, we don't even have office. She walked in Starbucks. She walked in those crazy, rude Hong Kong taxis, in the back of the taxis, to start everything. And now we have 2 floors. It's just like being 6 years, right? So Mark will not see what Jen did every day in Hong Kong, and nobody. So the mutual trust is really important, and give you also the flexibility. That is to say, I think in the age of millennials, we focus very much on the result, the outcome. At Facebook, we always say everybody should be a builder. No matter you are engineer, you are sales, you are in marketing or in other positions, you build something. You make the result better, and you contribute to the society. The product you do, other services you do. So this is what we believe. And the location, whether you work, that's not super relevant to the productivity. Whether you should stay in the office for the whole day or not.
There are other challenges, of course, though. So if everybody was working from home and no one was in the office at all, one, you'd question why you needed the office. But secondly, the issue of cross-fertilization of knowledge, the issue of bringing people together to share what it is that they have learned, to focus people's attention. As everyone is multi-skilling, it seems more and more as organizations become flatter and more matrix built. We have to be creative about how we do that. We have to also engineer, to some extent, the environment that creates the willingness for people to want to come to the office rather than working from home. If I had a choice, I want it to be an equal choice, and I want to be a specific reason of why I've chosen to do what I've needed to do. But I've been working for myself for the last 25 years, so I started the gig economy. Just want to let you all know, I was the millennial that started the gig economy in a Generation X body that's failing drastically. Gravity is taking hold. In our challenge of bringing people together, I think that's a significant challenge. And no, I don't need a tree house and a slide in my office to do that. I know you have to do that in Silicon Valley, because if you haven't got one, you're definitely losing out. But free food in Asia, which of course always brings everybody to the office, which I've understood is critically important ever since I got here 10 years ago. But I think that is where we have to start getting creative as leaders, as to how we create that environment which brings people together to share and collaborate. And I think it's critically important that there seems to be this myth that there's an awful lot of millennials who are more introverted than they are extroverted. So the need to be with people in order to give yourself energy, as opposed to the willingness to work on their own. I know an awful lot of neurotic, overachieving millennials who are incredibly hardworking and dedicated and massively introverted. And I think half of the challenge, and I don't think this is more than the others. I just think I seem to have stumbled across more of them in my work. The challenge of getting them to come together and to be with people and to collaborate with people, I think is an issue. And I don't think technology can replace all of that.
So we have like law firms. It's like, hey, hire some JLL to design the future of work. We want to bring the startup. We want this to be the startup environment in a law firm. So, so somehow, just because this startup bringing the lifeboat back, the work space and the free food probably just doesn't cut it. It's going to be about something more. And we earlier talked about, how do we get traditional industries to be as sexy as the social impact businesses. But so Brenda, you what makes it real?
Yeah, absolutely. So, speaking to this room, we're all here because we believe in it, right? We've all drunk the Kool-Aid. We all see the positive impact that bringing in minorities, whether it be women or different categories of minorities into the workforce, and allowing them to be themselves and to express themselves. So I think in more traditional kind of heritage companies or lines of work, where that magic comes in, or where that tipping point comes in, is if you're what we would call is courageously authentic, right? At a financial institution, at a law firm. Yeah, we are a law firm, and we work on IPOs, and we're here to make money, and money isn't a bad thing. And I think what you can do in kind of these more kind of heritage companies is that you trace the human element back into it. So a financial institution is widely productive for the fabric of society that we live in, but it's not just because it creates money. It's because money enables people to do good things. And it allows you to have an impact in the world. And so as a leader in your company, how do you trace that how do you bring that human story back into the office? And I think if you follow the hearts, or if you follow that human element, then that's one way to engage with your younger generations that always look for there being a deeper meaning to just filling out this stack of paper, or filling out this doing these processes that we have to do. Yeah.
So Cassie, go tell that to your parents. That's going to be a challenge because, share with us Cassie is actually born and raised in Hong Kong, so very Hong Kong tradition. So having that conversation and having you being in the startup, how does that conversation happen?
So I grew up here in Hong Kong, very traditional family. Dad, accountant, banker, and believes in you study, you get good grades, and you go to a big firm, you climb the corporate ladder, and you have a stable family, stable income. And so when I didn't do that, we argued a lot. It was a fight. And the whole traditional values, it's like, I'm your dad, I know more than you. You accept what it is, right? In the workplace, sometimes like that too. But I think this generation, or now that with digitalization, we are more inquisitive. We find answers out there. You cannot tell me that this is the way it is and accept it, because we challenge, and we want to do things that we believe in, and we want to do things that we value. So that's how that conversation go. It was tough for my dad to kind of see how things went. But I think now he's okay with it. He's happy. Yes. Yes.
He trusts you. You're okay.
Yes. So, yes. So it was challenging, but it turned around. It took a bit of time, and I think in corporate organization it's similar. So yes, going back to the workplace. Sorry, co-working space. I think that people now knows what works best for them. Whether you need to work at night. My coders work at night, and that's best for them in a dark room and just code away. And there are people like me who I get my energy from people. And even if I'm working alone, I might go to a co-working space. And I think nowadays, corporates also incorporate that, right? I think HSBC took over 2 floors at at WeWork, and their initiative is to be closer to the startup community, and the entire 20th floor always have events, and all the people, yes, go for the free food and the free beer, but also that sort of encourage the mingling and collaboration and be like, hey, what are you working on? Oh, what have you read today? And, the kind of interesting then projects. And that's also, what networking is about.
So interesting. I mean, co-working space is so hot these days, and I was like, yeah. I mean, Starbucks was my co-working space 10 years ago already. So, but it's good to see the concept is getting more and more attention, and become the new normal in Hong Kong and elsewhere. Back to your question about traditional corporations versus sort of the newcomers like us, I think one positive change I see already happening in the society, not just in Hong Kong, everywhere, is a lot of the traditional industries do pay attention to what is changing, what is getting more attractive for the future talent pool, that sort of things. One example we always say is, Sheryl Sandberg, our COO, she's really a strong advocate for female leadership, and she also launched a lot of new initiatives. We also have internal policy such as parental leave. We cover both men and women, so husband or wife. Whenever the family has a kid, you have 4 months paid leave, 4 months. And since we started, we see a lot of other companies also begin to go into that direction, including a lot of traditional companies. In terms of the free food and snacks, one example I can share is there's a very large regional, international actually, consulting company which recently revamped the whole office and had the regional headquarters in Hong Kong, in St. George building just next to here. They went to Seattle office, and the regional head got inspired, and they also put a lot of design, like the free food chef and those things in the office. It's not I think you understand, the cost is pretty manageable, right? But it's a good gesture to show to the colleagues, hey, it's not just a working place. Like, you don't come here just to work. You get inspired with your colleagues, network with your colleagues. You may someday not, don't work here anymore, but your colleagues become your friends. So that sort of a feeling is changing. And thanks for Greg for clarification. When I say work from home, I don't mean like everybody work from home. In fact, we don't need to tell everybody not to work from home or to work from home. They will come back to our office because we have so many free food, and we have a very high standard for ice cream. So that's why I told Elaine, we go for Movenpick, the best.
But obviously this centers around community, right? So we can't just work by ourselves. Community makes us work better. But if we
Together we're stronger.
Together we're stronger. Tweet that.
Use the hashtag. Hashtag. Never use it.
But in talking about community, one thing that I always wanted George to focus on is, about Hong Kong, right? So Hong Kong community, with the traditional culture where our education system really, it's rote learning. It's you just do what you're told. So yet we have this sexy new industry that you're supposed to think differently. You're supposed to be embracing and trying and trial and error. It's like you're not supposed to make an error, erase that mark. So, this Hong Kong's culture or educational system help develop these graduates, as you guys see in law firms you advise or Facebooks, and do you see that is that what they want as well?
So I think one thing that is very unique about Hong Kong is Hong Kong has been always entrepreneurial, for the past not just decades, I think a century. Talking about startup, Li Ka-shing also started as a startup, his company. But inside our
He's
company,
not done bad.
yeah. So inside our Hong Kong office, I think we have like 1/3 local Hong Kong colleagues. Some of them are really smart, young. But the thing that Hong Kong is missing is sort of the focus on education has been probably too much on those traditional career opportunities, which is not bad. I mean, everybody should have your own choice and preference to do whatever you want. But I was just thinking about what Cassie just said. Like the traditional Hong Kong parents, well, you have to be a doctor, you have to be a lawyer, and then but if everybody becomes a doctor and lawyer, and then what about the rest of the society? So we very much support the new, not really a new trend, but people talk about the STEM education. And I also go to government meetings and told them it's not just about STEM, it's actually the STEAM. Don't forget the arts, right? STEAM. So you have to have sort of liberal thinking, which will have a very long-term impact on your career. And when we interview people, we also see even the engineers. We want to see, like, you are more than a coder. What is your vision? What are you going to do in the next 10, 15 years? People talk about changing the world all the time in Silicon Valley, but how can you change the world? Start from yourself. So a lot of the engineers, they volunteer to do a lot of NGO work to help those NGOs to upgrade their digital skills. More than just their own day job to code the things for the company. So those are all very promising signs. So I just feel sometimes I'm pretty fed up with the mainstream media conversation. Every time we're talking about the property pricing in Hong Kong. Like, so if you ask people in the street, like the millennial or even the younger generation, what is your goal for the next 5 years? I want to buy my first apartment, period. So this is not that promising.
Yeah, but people always want what they haven't got. And that part of the human condition is never going to go away. So people always want what they think they can't have. And that's about a perception of acceptability, and that the markers are unbalanced. But I think this is also about how organizations are able to provide opportunities for people. Millennials tend to look at 10, 20, 30-year long service awards as something of a joke. And there are still some companies that still offer them. And there are companies that and I know of one millennial that received a 10-year service award at a very large US office furniture manufacturer and then resigned the next day. I'm glad they hung on in there for the 10 years, the 10-year marker. But I have to say, at our same point, we are absolutely passionately, what McKinsey talked about 10, 15 years ago as a war on talent. We have a war on talent. We're fighting for the same people. But we want these, once we have fought the battle, we want to keep them. Yeah. So if we're not giving out what we used to give to my father, which was a ruby and emerald type-in at 20 and 30 years for length of service, this doesn't exist anymore. If it doesn't exist anymore, then we as organizations, we have to provide the career opportunities for people within them. I mean, organizations such as certain pharmaceutical companies I work with say, you're in a job for 3 years, and then it's what's next. So every 3 years, you will be changing job. Every 3 years, you may be moving country. Every 3 years, there will be a secondment or an international exposure or an international role, or you'll be moving discipline, or you'll be adding another discipline to it. Organizational structures now, in order to retain energy and commitment and create engagement and diversity and harness talent and grow knowledge and skills and expertise, is going to have to be continually moving and shaping in order to make that happen, which requires different skills on us as leaders, and different skills on the support functions that make all of that happen. But other traditional organizations like law firms, for example, can't do that. So what does it look like for a law firm structure? What does it look like for a professional services firm structure? When we're talking about designing what the future of work looks like, these are the big questions. That we need to be thinking about, and there isn't an answer for, there isn't a golden panacea for, in how we harness what the talent that we're actually fighting for, that long service becomes a reality of choice. Yeah, not a reality of, well, if I hang on in here, I get my tankard and my type-in.
By the way,
which is what my father said. Let's face it.
Law firms look pretty good in The Good Wife.
Yeah, they do look pretty good in Good Life and Good Wife. Yes, they look pretty good. Yes.
But then coming back to the millennials, like, what does like a good career, a good company look like to you?
Wow. So I guess I can answer that. That kind of like what lured me away from a cushy corporate job was it was an opportunity to make an impact. And very humbly, we like to say we're just saving the world by eliminating poverty. But that would have rung true not just for the specific company that I've chosen to work at now, but more of it provided an opportunity, one where I felt that I could make a difference in my immediate surroundings. So with my colleagues and with my superiors and with my managers. But then it also allowed me to feel good about what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis, where it's not just creating beautiful products that makes people live more comfortably, where it's actually having kind of that, it ties back to a human element, and it's easier with a startup company to kind of shape your company around that because you don't have the history of 100 years of, oh, this is how we've done things. But I think you can create that environment in a more kind of heritage line of work, whether it be lawyers. We've picked a lot on lawyers today, whether it be like a law firm or any kind of company that's existed for more than 5 years. That's not a bad thing. There's a lot of heritage there, and you can use that to your advantage. And all of us here could do little pilot programs similar to what Elaine did in her role before, where it doesn't have to be a big thought out program, but you can create an environment where you can have that startup feel by allowing people to fail. Right, and just provide the framework. It doesn't have to be a fully fleshed out program. It's just creating like a, if you will, in a touchy-feely sense, that safe space of like, let's talk about the crazy ideas and let's give it a go and let's pilot it. And I think once you have a few small wins, and really it only takes one small win, then other people in the organization will start to take notice, and they'll start to say, oh, it's not just a crazy idea about some article I read on LinkedIn. There's an actual tangible impact and benefit that it could bring to my company.
Before we move to Q&A, I would love to hear from Cassie. Like, what does it take?
So echoing what Brenda said, it's really about job satisfaction and making a direct impact. And I find it much easier or direct in a startup environment and with somewhere that's innovative. And we in startup, we talk a lot about agile project management or agile product development. So every sprint is 2 weeks. Like everything we change is within 2 weeks. We review, and everything comes from the customers, and it's all data analysis, right? Like whether this change we implement 2 weeks ago, how has it? What is the data like? Is people like reacting to it, and do we need to change it? We're talking about 2 week time frame, and that is for us, agile. Where I don't think that corporate would necessarily be able to be.
Actually, I just heard the other day that a company no longer run IT projects, like SAP, 5 years implementation, and hopefully that you get it completed. All the IT, they only run, no projects last more than 6 weeks. And this is a big heritage, big corporate, because they realize that you got to keep trying. You got to just keep trying and see. It doesn't have to be that final project that will take too long and everybody gets demotivated. But with that, I kind of want to open up to the questions to the audience. We have a very interesting views, both for millennials and advisor and sexy industries. But in case there's bankers and lawyers out there who get an accountants who totally got picked on today, please, we'd love to hear from you. Yes. Oh, sorry, the mic is coming.
Your headline is the next generation. It's the next generation disrupting the workforce, but nobody's mentioned about robots. Yes. Now, with the advent of artificial intelligence, it was a speaker at a conference I was at 2 weeks ago that said, if you're still doing the same job in the same way in 1 year, you can be replaced by a robot. So probably the lawyers and accountants are getting very worried.
There's many examples of outsourced service centers, for example, where organizations have invested millions of pounds in the establishment of them and they'll never open. because AI is now doing what these outsourcing centers were designed to do. And IBM have already begun closing down their outsourced centers in India. And it's a big thing. And the level of conversation, the amount of conversation that we need to be having isn't happening in this part of the world, to be brutally honest. And in Australia, it's not happening at all. At least some is happening here. So you're right, in the advent of technology, but yes, if you allow technology to run riot, you're right. Yeah, within a very short period of time, you may find yourself obsolete. Yeah, but our duty and our responsibility as leaders in our organizations is not to allow technology to run riot, is to think about technology cleverly and intelligently, is to figure out how we can work with technology effectively, and what is the purpose, why we want to work with technology effectively, and then how we enable our people to work in collaboration with it. Yeah, not to allow it to run riot or to allow our organization to be disrupted because we put our head in buckets and did nothing. If we manage the integration of technology in our organization, it won't be anywhere near the fear-mongering that is being done right now in order to encourage us to have the conversation. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I also want to touch on the AR part.
Technology, okay.
So we are a technology company. You know, a lot of people know Facebook from the Facebook app, but we actually do a lot of other things. Oculus is the VR company wholly owned by Facebook, Instagram too, and we also have a unit very focused on AI stuff. I think when people talk about, you know, whether AI or robot will replace human beings for workforce, you know, that's a part of the whole story is missing usually in the conversation. When you look back into the history, you know, the technology always evolves, you know, radio and then TV and then internet. When a new technology emerges, it does replace some of the job opportunity, but it also releases the time for the workforce to do something else, right? Before email, that was fax. Do you feel when you get...
It is fax in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
They keep telling me to go to a 7-Eleven. That's where the fax machines are.
Yeah. So one quick example is we begin to implement AI into the Facebook Messenger. So for a lot of small business, yeah, you have the chatbot. Does that mean the customer service, you know, like the workforce will be gone? Not really. I mean, the customer service also need to evolve to that sort of digital standard. That is actually a huge market. You can imagine not many people in Hong Kong have the skill set to do those chatbots, you know, how to, because the bot is still supported by human with all the information to feed in, right? Yeah, so, and this is fair for everybody because this is a new area. You know, nobody will claim to be an expert overnight. So it creates a lot of opportunities for the new generation or even the senior, talents if they have the interest to develop into that area. So I think the opportunities are pretty fair for everybody.
Thank you for your very thought-provoking session. I just wanted, a lot of you mentioned culture, and I guess corporate culture, but in this globalized world where the culture of multinationals operating across different countries and different cities, the culture of those regional offices are different from one another. Hong Kong especially suffers from what we call presenteeism, right? And a lot of you said, flexi time, agile workforce, focus on output. Could you give us some practical takeaways or practical strategies to actually be able to focus on output? Because what's the compelling argument to deal with culture in its essence?
I have to answer it. I feel like we are doing such a great job to reflect the local culture, and given the fact that we are also a US-based global company. Again, if you have chance to visit our office, you will immediately notice Facebook Hong Kong is very different in the way designed with the rest of the Facebook office, but you also share a lot of same things. So, for example, we have a lot of meeting rooms, and each meeting room will have a name for the meeting room. And in the Hong Kong office, you will find all the meeting rooms reflect a local Hong Kong culture. And we have our colleagues to create, to think about what the name is when the office was renovated. And it's a very democratic process. Everybody will vote. Which name gets the most vote and it will be named. So I also got a chance to name one meeting room, not based on my name, but based on the, yeah. Mark will kill me. But based on something I feel very interesting about Hong Kong, so one of the meeting rooms in my office is called Kennedy. But the translation, the Chinese name for the Kennedy is called Ging Lei Day. Yeah, so it's like a pun. So basically it means like someone out of touch with the public. If you know the Cantonese, you will know the pun. So that is to retain the local culture in the mix of the global picture, right? And back to your point about efficiency. When you work in a local office, of course you will have a lot of local colleagues, right? You don't want to people feel like, well, this is just another US company, right? So the more they feel they belong to this workplace, we believe the more efficient they will be naturally, and they will be very proud of Hong Kong and working in Hong Kong office of Facebook.
I think it's, to answer your question, the local office is serving the local customers. The closer you bring your customers to the office, the more it begins to regionalize and give a local cultural perspective on a global culture. Yeah, because it is very different. I love it when guys in America make decisions and think that things will happen as a result of those decisions in Asia countries in the way that it happens in America. And it always surprises me, their complete disbelief when they go, oh, what happened? They didn't. And who left? Why? And it's just that they have just no connection and understanding.
And sometimes they see APAC as a country. You know what I mean?
Yeah. They go, yeah, in APAC. What's the capital of APAC? It's bizarre. It's absolutely fascinating. So I think, yes, in order that if you bring your customer closer, you will recognize the need for your local culture to adapt to fit its local environment.
As a product of the United States public school system, I too ask, what's the capital of APAC? No. But even in a small startup company as my own, we faced this. And being the first employee out in Asia, one of the things I encourage the rest of, we call it the Asia contingency, is we're very vocal about it. I've only rightfully or wrongfully worked for US-based companies in Asia, and it's always that feeling of like we have to provide a service, or that we have to take our meetings at our nighttime because it's during their daytime. And what I've found that has been very successful is just speaking up about it. And making those comments that sometimes they're maybe on the edge of snarky of, guys, we can't keep debating this uselessly because it's midnight and I'm going to bed. And encouraging, and perhaps it's easier because I speak English very comfortably, and I went to school in the U.S., but encouraging and providing kind of, again, that framework for the rest of my employees and colleagues to feel as comfortable to speak up and to not just say yes and provide that service, but to put their foot down, not put their foot down, but to let their voice be heard. And it just encouraging that of you too have a voice and you too have opinions that are valid and actually very useful. So we need to hear them.
Speaking about culture and localization, it's not just by country. Actually, in Hong Kong, as a business owner, I also face this. What do I do? There is the English-speaking crowd in like Hong Kong Island, and there is, some of the more local Kowloon. When I do content, do I do English or Chinese? And so it's not country-based, but it's very customer or end user oriented. So it's not a top-down decision. It's more like, even looking at a business, right? Like who are your target audience? What is their feedback? You would hear it directly because you're so close to the customers. What do they need? What are they looking for? And what are they more comfortable about? So, so localization, not just in a country, but even like a district or, yeah.
direct a question over here.
Yeah. So my name's Marina. I work for a 100-year-old company as well. And my question's around sustainable engagement that you started with between the millennials and the non-millennials, specifically the senior management. So I've seen that, there are kind of campaigns and pilot projects coming through, but it's very difficult for senior management sometimes to let go and to trust and to let go of the, basically control, if I may be honest, about flexibility, about empowerment, and all these things that they know works for other companies or their peers, whatever. And then at the same time, even if they've been convinced or motivated to try these, there's a talent, the war on talent, that every 3 years they go. So what's the point?
Well,
You put all this in and you've done all these things, and 3 years later, you lose your best
But that was
talent,
always the
so-
case here. It was always the case here where they said, well, people just jump ship. When I first moved to Hong Kong, they said, and I said, is anyone having an engagement conversation? Because I came from Europe where we were talking about engagement. They said, oh, no, that's just useless here. And I said, why? I said, well, people just move for 1,000 Hong Kong dollars a month and they're just gone. So, and I said, well, what in terms of developing the people and building a performance culture? He said, absolutely no point. What's the point of developing people if they're just going to work for your competition in a year's time? So I said, well, so what are we doing? Nothing. We're just paying people. And I said, but well, how do you know who to pay a lot of money to and who to pay a small amount of money to? No, we just pay everybody a small amount of money because it doesn't really matter. And I said, no, but hang on, I really don't get to understand it. And my father said to me, oh, well, don't move to Hong Kong. If you think you're going to do what you do for a living here, don't come here. It's a ridiculous idea. But I'm here. And I've stayed here, and it's not a ridiculous idea. I think you've always got this challenge. It's not because people are going to move. Yeah, it's the people you have to work at to keep them. Yeah, so the complacency's gone. Yeah, so when you're facing these arguments, and it's the small wins and it's the small successes that make this alive, and you just keep going. Resilience is absolutely important. Yes, it's our key competency moving forward. But you just keep trying the small wins. But it's just the fact that people will stay. Yeah, and this millennial thing, it's not a millennial thing. It's an everybody thing. Yeah, I interviewed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of East Asian millennials trying to debunk Western Asian philosophy, and value sets. It's not true. They're all the same. Yeah, there isn't a separate one. I expected much more collectivism in this part of the world than the individualistic millennials of the West. It's not true. Yeah, and I said, well, also I expected Gen X to be different from Gen Y then, and Gen Y were the troublemakers. No. They share the same. It's just that Gen X now have the courage to put their hand up and say, I'm identifying as a millennial, I'll have some of that, please. Yeah, and even some baby boomers are doing the same. So, yes, keep going. Just keep going. And don't make it a millennial thing. Make it a thing for a bigger purpose. Yeah, millennials are disrupting the workplace. They've given us an excuse to do it. Yeah, another excuse to do it. And there's always going to be an excuse to disrupt the workplace because we need to adapt and change in order to meet the needs of our customers in the way that they want their needs to be met. So don't make them the why. Yeah, make the customers the why. Make the purpose of the organization the why. Yeah.
Well, I think that's if we kind of like remove the label of millennial, the fact is that they are the fax machine of yesteryears, where we're like, oh my God, this label we don't want to change. But in fact, if you remove that label, it's just the progression of how our business community or our leadership style, all of that just evolves. And with
and
that...
by the way, we do have a lot of senior management who are millennial. Our CEO is also a millennial, of course.
A very, very successful one. But with that, I think Lolly was supposed to be on this panel before she got stolen for the morning panel. But this is why I need to leave you with, is that they have in Lian Feng a Chief Happiness Officer. So perhaps we kind of add that to the C-suite that will really help us drive the engagement. Is that you? Well, thank you. Well, thank you very much for a wonderful panel, and thank you for your participation. I know not all the questions got answered, but please feel free to come up and speak with us. And thank you very, very much. Enjoy the rest of the day.